Hi, I'm William Allen. I'm an environmental scientist with the Needs Analysis Unit, and I had a pretty large helping hand with the development and editing of Section 8 for the eAR. And I believe, Wendy, if you don't mind sharing your screen, because I wanted to go through a sample eAR so we could see there's a lot of like hide and reveal involved with this section. So I find it easier just to see like a live version of it. So just bear with us for a second. Okay, perfect. So starting off with Section 8A, this will be for customer charges. Now, not every water system will see the full extent of this section. Typically, it's reserved for public water systems, and I believe there is a service connection cap of about 200 service connections or more. So if you qualify, you should be able to see this section entirely, which will include both residential and non-residential questions. So for our first question is basically it's going to ask if you even charge your customers for water. So if you say no, you'll be asked to explain why, and there's like a selection of like pre-selected options you have to give a quick explanation as to why you don't charge your customers for water. And if we don't have an answer up there, you can always pick other and provide your answer in the text box below, and we'll review that. And it'll still ask you if you have like selectable customer types, because even if you don't charge your customers, you could still indicate what kind of customers you have, both either residential or non-residential. So for now, we'll just pick both. And as you can see, as you're going down section 8A, depending on what answers you provide, it will guide you to the next relevant question that we feel you should be able to answer. So section 8.2 will now be asking about your residential service connections. And it's basically, since you testify that you don't charge customers for water, you're not going to be asked anything related to water rate or your water customer charges. Or for your residential customers, it's just going to be asking you about infrastructure information such as service connections, the new fee for adding a new connection, or then based off the most common meter size. Yeah, this one just asks you more information about that, and that's pretty much it. That's the quickest way you can get through this section is if you say no. We're going to go back up though, and we're going to say that yes, we do charge our customers for water. So now you can see we have a different roster of questions that have popped up. Now we're being asked again what kind of customer types we have. For this sample or example, we're going to pick both so we can go through what kind of information you need to write down for both. And then the next question is going to be billing frequency for your for either customer type. So your billing frequency is basically going to be, um, oh sorry, sorry, I got this one confused. It's basically asking you if your residential and non-residential customers are billed at the same frequency. So if you're billing both of your customer types every month, every 2 months, then you would say yes. If they're different, then you would say no and indicate for either one. So if you say no, then you would look for your most common residential water rate structure. Um, and it's going to ask you, and then ask you the same question basically if your water rate structure is the same for both customer types. So you can indicate yes or no. So it'll be asking if your billing frequency or your water rate structure are the same. So for this example, we're going to pick yes for both. And we're going to say our billing frequency is going to be, we'll do monthly. Now, this billing frequency comes into play later when you write down your water rates. Depending on what your frequency is, it'll actually take that into account when in section 8B, when we produce the what we believe is your monthly water rate for a certain amount of water. So just to keep that in mind, we'll discuss that later, but your billing frequency does matter a lot as far as like how the calculation inputs your data. So going down to probably the most infamous question is what kind of rate structure your water system uses. Now, rate structures can vary depending on your water system type, and we try to capture, there's all kinds of water rates structures, but we try to capture the general ones that we've seen based off of submitted water rates documents. We'll start with the top. So the most simple would probably be a single or flat rate. And that's basically like saying you only charge your customers a single fee every month or so, whenever your frequency is, for just unlimited use or access to the water available. There's no input for volume consumed or anything like that. It's just the single or flat rate. If we go down to base rate, fixed, usage rate, uniform, basically what that's saying is that for your base rate, it's similar to a flat rate. It'd be the second option. It's similar to your second option from the top underneath single or flat rate, please. But basically, your base rate's similar to a flat rate, but it's basically your fee for entrance or fee for using access or having access to the water. And on top of that, you have a usage rate, which basically means on top of your base rate, you're now being charged with the volume of water, but depending on how much volume of water you're consuming. And then that can vary as well. So your base rate, for instance, here is considered fixed, which means that your base rate won't change depending on how much water you're consuming. So let's say you get charged at, like for using 100 gallons, you have a base rate of $10. If you go past that $100 or 100-gallon mark, you'll still get charged $10 for the base rate, no matter how much volume you're consuming. And then for the usage rate uniform, it's kind of the same idea, but now it's for your usage rate. So for 100 gallons of water, you're being charged, let's say $2 per gallon. After 100 gallons of water, you got the 200 gallons of water usage. Now you're being charged a base rate and $2 again per gallon for those 200 gallons afterwards. So it basically goes from like a single fee to now you're being charged a base rate, plus now you're being charged for the amount of water you're consuming. The next tier above that would be base rate fixed, which is the same idea as before, but now your usage rate is variable. So now we're taking into consideration how much water you're consuming. So after that 100-gallon mark, you can bump it up to 200 gallons. And now instead of being charged $2 per gallon, you're being charged $4 per gallon. So your usage rate is now changing depending on the volume of water you're consuming. And then we have base rate variable usage rate uniform, which is when your base rate changes depending on how much volume of water you're consuming, but your usage rate is not changing. And then the most complicated of these would be the variable base rate and variable usage rate, where both your base rate and your usage rate will change depending on how much volume of water you're consuming. We do try to account for allocation based, which we've seen in a few water rates documents. Currently, with the most recent version of the eAR, we have a hard time accounting for allocation or other types of water rate structures, but it is important for us to acknowledge and note down which systems are actually using these kind of water rate structures. And we're hoping to implement changes for the future to accommodate these kind of water rate structures. But for now, Section 8A is mostly tailored around the 5 water rates you see above. But you still can indicate what your allocation is. And in 8B, you could still indicate what your charge for customers will be by hand. You don't need to rely on the eAR's internal algorithm to develop that for you. And if you do use an alternative water rate, we do ask that you to provide a couple of notes down on that briefly explain how you go about charging for water that isn't that's outside of the purview of what we've already discussed above. Right. And then down at A1.4, we have our unit of measure. So this also comes into play with how we calculate your water rate on the back end. Depending what unit of measure, things will be converted over. Now, the most common thing I notice is that whenever you have an exceptionally large water rate, typically the issue is that gallons was selected other than 1,000 gallons. So if you're writing in terms of let's say your usage is up to 2,000 gallons, and you have selected 1,000 gallons as your unit of measure, and you write the number 2,000. Now it's going to read that as 2,000 gallons instead of actually 2,000 gallons. So just want to emphasize that paying attention to what kind of unit measures you're working with has a huge impact on the final number that you'll get. So for this example, we'll just do gallons, keep it simple. And then over here, we just want to have you indicate if there's anything that affects any kind of variances that affects your residential water rates of any kind. So it could be for agricultural use. There could be a drought factor that's incorporated into your water rates. It could be different depending on what elevation the customer's at. Just something to give us more of a more detailed purview of how water rates are distributed across your system. These just give us a better idea of what is actually being represented by the data here, because we know we're asking for an average, so it helps us caveat that average. And then down below in A1.6, so your residential customers can be split up into single or multifamily units. Single family being that of a housing or a single housing unit. Multifamily relating to your apartment complexes or townhouses, usually where there's groups of service connections put together. And for now, we'll say yes. So we're going to have we have both single family and multifamily building classes for this case. And we're going to say, did your water rates change in the reporting year? We're going to say no for this one. Then we're going to scoot down. Lenny, do you mind scrolling down a little bit? Can you scroll back up? Sorry, just noticing that the table didn't load in properly. Do you mind scrolling back up? Maybe we didn't select something correctly. Yes. Oh, for a 1.6, please select yes if you don't mind. Or sorry, below that for did you watch streets change? You mind scrolling back up? Scrolling back up all the way. Oh, that's why. For the billing, for the rate structure, do you mind selecting just scroll down a little bit? Instead of other, can you select base rate, fixed, usage rate, variable? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so actually, that's a pretty good point to bring up. So if you select a rate structure we cannot accommodate for, such as allocation or other, you won't see the table to input your data. And the table will change depending on which rate structure you select. So I find this one to be the most common one that I've worked with. So we'll start with this as the first example. So now that we've selected our billing, or our billing classes of single family and multifamily, we're going to indicate how many tiers per class. Now, tiers relate directly to the table below. You see it at 1.8. Now, you could say tiers are mostly based around unit of consumption or volume of consumption. So remember earlier when I mentioned that your usage rate or your base rate can be variable. It's related to those number of tiers. So let's say for your first tier would be that 0 to 100 gallons of usage. Anything after that would not be considered a second tier. And those tiers can be split up by your single and multifamily if you've indicated that you have different billing classes per. So for this one, we're going to say we have two tiers for single family. And then for multifamily, we'll just say we'll have three tiers for multifamily, just to mix it up a little bit. So now that we're saying that we have a uniform base rate, you'll see that the cells below from tier one to tier two don't exist. There's only tier one because you're saying that the base rate is the same no matter how much water you're consuming. So we've tried to accommodate that visually here. So for our base rate, we'll just say 100. Yep. And now it's asking for your usage rate. What is the maximum volume for each tier? So that's basically like saying if this tier goes from or accounts for 0 to 100 gallons of use, that means your maximum number will be 100 there. And then you notice that the cell below that is actually blank because since you're indicating that there's only two tiers, that would imply that you can only accommodate for things going from 0 to 100 and then 100 afterwards. So the blank usually means to infinity, conceptually. Now I'm sure if your water systems are charging very little for a ridiculous amount of water, there's probably something you can do to accommodate that. But just for how the math works out, that's how you can think about it. If you see a blank cell, you could think of that as like anything beyond what your last tier was stopping at. And then this one, cost per unit of measure. Basically, it's asking you how much money or how much are you charging per unit of measure. And earlier we selected gallons, so this is asking you at 0 to 100 gallons, how much are you charging customers per gallon? So for this example, we're going to say $2 per gallon. If you go beyond 100 gallons of usage, now you're going to be charged at $4 per gallon. And so this is going to be related strictly to our single family usage. Now for a multifamily, it's the same idea, but now it's just if you have that kind of rate structure with these kind of customer types, you just type in the information related to them specifically. So we'll say they get charged the same amount for the first year for single family, so 100 base rate. It goes up to 100 gallons, and then it's $2 per gallon. Now let's say our second tier for multifamily, since it's a group of people put together, we want to accommodate for large volumes of usage. So we'll say that our next tier is going to be from 100 to 500 gallons. So you'll put a 500 down in the next cell. And remember, again, the blank cell below says anything 500 and beyond is what you're charging now. So for 100 to 500, yeah, we'll say we'll do $4 a gallon. And after that, we'll say we charged, $6 a gallon. And then down here, below that, it's basically, if you can scroll back up a little bit to A1.9. So I kind of briefed this really quickly, but basically it's just asking if your rates have changed per year. So if last year to this year, you probably saw the same table and you're saying like, no, there's no change. We'd want you to indicate that by just selecting no change. If there has been a slight change or if there's been any increase in like cost, we do wish you would indicate that by selecting one of the options we have already below, or if it's not listed there, just like yes and then other, and then give us a brief description as to why. And then below that at A1.10, it's basically asking what is the last date of the most recent rate structure change. So if you have had a change, it's just asking if you can estimate like when that change occurred. And then here again, we're asking you to briefly describe what kind of changes were made to your rate structure. You could say things like, we have a new system, we've added, we charge more for our base rate, things like that. And then for A1.12 and A1.13, it's basically asking for proof of your water rate structure. So that could either be a link to a system's website for customer charges. You can put the URL there. For A1.13, it's just a rate structure document that you can upload that helps us verify the water rate that you're getting on the back end in a 1 point or in AB or section AB. The water rate document is very important. It helps us QA/QC a lot of issues that we've had in the past when it comes to like problematic water rates and being able to identify what is the correct water rate structure the system should be seeing or should be selecting. And then another box just to explain if you have if you have like if you want to give more explanation behind your single and multifamily rate structures and how they're allocated. And then also to indicate if your customer bill includes any non-drinking water charges. So if that water bill includes things like wastewater, stormwater, electricity, or if it's incorporated into other utilities, we'd want to know. So you could say yes for that one. And then we ask you to explain which kind of services are included in that water rate. And of course, we also provide an other text box below. Um, And then down below, it's that you get, once again, you get hit to the residential service connection questions. We could skip through that. And since we indicated that we had both residential and non-residential customers, since you selected non-residential, if you select both or non-residential, you'll see A3, which asks you a very similar set of questions to the residential customers. So for the first one, it's basically asking your unit measure. Again, we're going to pick gallons. What kind of connection types you have for your non-residential customer, for your non-residential connections. So you could say commercial, landscape. And then if you have other, obviously you could put it in the other box. A3.6 is basically asking you if you have a variable rate structure. So we could say yes, unless you just charge everyone the same, no matter how much water they're consuming. And depending on which kind of non-residential customers you selected, it'll provide a box for you to determine what kind, the number of tiers of charge that you have per customer type. So we can say for commercial 1, for landscape, we'll do 2. And then for, I think you selected other, we'll do 3. And as you can see, that affects the table below. Depending what number of tiers you have, you'll see different levels of cells that are available for you to fill out information. So for our commercial, we'll just use the same example, 100, $100 base rate, 100 gallons as the maximum tier of consumption, and the costs per unit of measure. Now, there's something I should probably point out with this table. You notice that all the cells are available. Like for instance, commercial tier 1, since there's only one tier, doesn't make sense for us to put in 100 for the maximum unit of measure. We utilize the residential water rates more heavily than we do the non-residential water rates. So more attention has been made towards QA/QCing the non-residential table. Or my bad, the residential table. But that doesn't mean that the non-residential table is not important. There's just less visual aids for this one. So for this one, I want you to keep in mind that when you're saying we'd actually want to delete the 100, since there's only one tier, you'd want to leave that space blank, indicating that it'll be for commercial tier 1 usage rate structure. So the base rate would be 100, and then the next one would be just left blank. Since you only indicated you have one tier, you want to say only charge $100 no matter how much water they're consuming. And for this example, you're saying that no matter how much water they consume, I'm still charging them $2 per gallon on top of their base rate. For things with more than one tier, you'd want to provide a top unit of measure for the first tier. Not for tier 2. You want to remember your last tier, you want to leave open-ended, saying that basically it's anything beyond the last tier. So for the second example for landscape, we can say your base rate's 100. The top unit measure will be, we'll say 500 gallons because it's a landscape non-residential customer. $2 per gallon, I think is fine. And then for the second tier, we'll leave tier 2 blank for the base rate. We'll say that the base rate's fixed. And so you're being charged $100 no matter how much water you're consuming. And after that, we'll just leave that one blank as well. So that'll indicate basically that you have $100 per base rate, and 500 and beyond will be the second tier. And now you're being charged, let's say $10 per gallon now that you're using more than 500 gallons per billing frequency.
Will, can you tell me which cell, what to put in each cell?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So for tier two, we'll leave that one as put 100 for that one. And then for that one, we'll leave that one blank. And then that one we'll put 10. So what this is saying is that for your first tier of landscape irrigation, you're being charged $100. It goes up to 500 gallons. And for those 0 to 500 gallons, you're going to be charged $2 per gallon. For the second tier, you're still being charged $100 base rate, but now it's anywhere from 500 to an infinite amount of gallons, 500 and beyond. You're going to be charged $10 per gallon now. So that's basically what that's saying. And it'd be the same logic for other. We could scroll back up. I don't think we need to fill out the other one. And then if you don't mind, if we could scroll back up to the top. So I know that was like a lot of information to run through. Again, we'll have time for questions afterwards. I'd be happy to go through this again. It just takes like a lot of familiarity with the no, you can sound 8A with the section itself. I think it's a lot simpler once you get into it and start reading it like line by line. And like I said, if you guys have run into any trouble, feel free to like email the help email that we'll provide afterwards. So that was just an example of like a typical run for a water system. Usually they'll have both customer types. Typically they'll have both single family and multifamily customers. And typically you'll see at least a base rate with a variable usage rate. But that's not always the case. So for this instance, we'll say, yes, we charge for water, and we'll say we only have residential customers. And then if you don't mind scrolling down all the way. And then as you can see, if you don't mind scrolling down to the bottom, Wendy. Now, as you can see there, we actually lost that non-residential customer charge section, and that's because you only indicated that you have residential customers. And then vice versa is true. If you select only non-residential customers, you'll lose, you won't see the residential section, and you won't be required to fill that out. So if you don't mind selecting residential, I think where the most common issue comes up is just selecting the correct rate structure. So if you scroll back up, we'll go to the rate structure question. So we'll say this time we have a base rate that's variable and a usage rate that's uniform. So basic, oh, sorry, we'll do base rate variable, usage rate variable, because that's technically the most complicated one you can have on here. So what we're saying here is that depending on how much volume of water you're consuming, you're being charged a different base rate and a different usage rate per tier. So for this one, we're going to leave it at monthly for our frequency. We're going to leave it at gallons for our unit of measure. We'll just say that those things also are incorporated into our rate structure. And for this one, we'll say, yes, we have two different ones. We're going to pick, I see somebody raised their hand. Are we going to be taking questions now, or do you want to like hold off?
I'd like to hold off to the end.
Okay, got you. Yeah, if you could just make a mental note of what you had a question about, I'd be happy to go back and talk it over. So for A1.6, we're going to say yes. And then for A1.7B, we're going to say we have 3 tiers for our single family and only 2 tiers. Actually, let's leave it as pick 1 for our multifamily. Now, the pick 1 option basically indicates, oh, no, we can't. Okay, so you saw that right there. If you leave it at pick 1, you'll see that there's a flag above. It says 2 or more tiers defined for usage rate structure. Now that's a warning letting you know that since you selected you had a variable base rate and a variable usage rate, there should be more than just 1 tier per customer type. So to fix that, you basically go back up here and be like, oh, sorry, I misclicked. I meant to select 2 tiers. And you'll see that disappear as you type in data. So we'll say for a single family, our first tier is going to be for our base rate. We'll say it's $10. Sorry. Yeah, we'll say it's $10. So for the first cell, it's basically asking the same thing for our usage rate. What is the maximum volume of water here? So we'll say this goes up to 100 gallons. And we'll do the same thing for usage rate. And as you can see, this does allow you to do some complex reporting. You can say that your first tier has a different volume maximum for your base rate than it does for your usage rate. But for simplicity's sake, we'll say it's the same thing. So from 0 to 100, this is how much you're being charged for your base rate and how much you're being charged for your usage. So we'll say that you're being charged $2 per gallon. Okay, and then for your second tier, we'll say this is up to 200 gallons. We'll say your base rate is now going to be $15. Once again, it'll be 200. And we'll say you're getting charged $4 per gallon now. And then as you can see, those warning signs went away as you inputted data correctly to match what you selected above. Yep, you got it right. So we'll say that the second tier goes up to 300. Now remember, if you want to account for sorry, if you want to account for like anything beyond 200, you'd want to leave that sub below blank. So we'll say instead of 300, do you mind deleting it? And we'll say for this one, yeah, 20, and we'll leave that one blank, and then we'll just say 6. And then multifamily, you could just do the same thing you did for the single family tier 1. Now leaving the last tier blank for the volume of water per tier is pretty important when it comes to how we actually calculate the average water rate that we use. I'll get into detail about that in 8B, but just keep in mind that what we ask for can sometimes we ask for an average water rate at 6 HCF per month. So across like all water systems, what we look at is we standardize your water rate to say how much would you charge a customer for water if they use 600 cubic feet of water for a month. And so our backend calculation basically takes this data and converts it over into that specific unit. Now, whenever you're indicating this, 6 HCF can easily go beyond your last tier. If you like, let's say we put I can't remember the exact conversion of what 6 HCF or 6 HCF is in gallons, but let's say that your tier 3 was 100 gallons. The calculation would have a hard time accommodating because now you haven't indicated how much you charge after 100 gallons because that's your top volume and there's no other volume afterwards. So sometimes that can come into play when it comes into how you write it in the table. Okay, I think that looks good to me. Mind scrolling down? Okay, I think this is okay to move on to section 8B, so we'll click next. You want to make sure that you're clicking the bottom buttons at the bottom of the eAR, this pre-fill to next little gray questions or little gray buttons. I'm not sure if it's still an issue, but in the past we've had problems with if you scroll up to the top, you saw you could select different sections by tabular in tabular form. I'm not sure if this is still a problem, but in the past we've had issues where if you selected, let's say you selected 8B to get to the next section, it wouldn't save your results from the previous section. So clicking next for sure will save the results you inputted for 8A.
Also, Will, this is Wendy. I just want to mention that the section 8A and B tend to be a little longer in runtime because there's a lot going on in the back end. So please be patient. We know that these sections are a little longer in load time than other sections. And as you can tell, I'm in a test environment, but as you can tell, my computer is taking longer than normal for other sections. So yeah, there we go.
Okay. Yeah, you captured it perfectly. Because we have that backend calculation related to A1.8, it takes a while to incorporate all the data you input it and convert it to that 6 HCF per month standard customer charge that we use across the state.